I thought my daughter would want me there on the most important day of her life, her wedding. But instead, she looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, we don't need you involved." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I realized that if she didn't need me there, maybe she didn't need my money either. What happened next? It changed everything. And trust me, you won't believe how far I went. Every parent dreams about walking their child down the aisle. You imagine the perfect day. The flowers, the music, the laughter, the tears. You imagine your child looking at you with gratitude, love and joy. I thought I would feel that. I thought I would be proud, but life has a way of rewriting even the best dreams. My daughter, Lily, she was the light of my life. From the moment she was born, I dedicated every ounce of my energy to making sure she had everything she needed. And not just the big things, the small, quiet moments mattered just as much. The first scraped knee I kissed better. The first time she rode her bike without training wheels. The nights I stayed up worrying when she had her first sleepover at a friend's house. Every single moment felt sacred. I remember her 5th birthday like it was yesterday. I'd been working overtime that week, saving every penny to get her the dollhouse she'd been begging for. It wasn't just any dollhouse. It was the one she had circled in the store catalogue for months. A tiny, intricate palace with little windows, shutters, and a mailbox she could actually open. I wanted her to see my effort, my love, my dedication. And when she opened it, her eyes sparkled in a way I'll never forget. That moment, pure joy made everything else melt away. Work, bills, exhaustion, none of it mattered. I was her hero. Over the years, I watched her grow. Every milestone, every triumph, every heartbreak, I was there. First day of school, first best friend, first heartbreak. Every time she came to me crying, I held her. Every time she came to me laughing, I celebrated with her. Every time she needed advice, I tried to give it. And every time she succeeded, I cheered louder than anyone else. That was my role. That was my joy. That was my purpose. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. Everyone does. I forgot a few school events here and there, sometimes got frustrated when she tested boundaries, sometimes yelled when I shouldn't have. But I always apologized. I always tried. And more than anything, I loved her fiercely, completely, without reservation. As the years passed, I began imagining the day she would be grown, the day she would fall in love, the day she would have her wedding. I pictured walking her down the aisle, my hand on hers, her eyes glistening with tears of happiness. I imagined the smiles of our family, the music swelling, the applause, and the unspoken bond between father and daughter shining in every glance. I imagined it endlessly. I had no idea how fragile that dream was. I had no idea that one day the daughter who clung to my hand when she was 3 would one day tell me that I wasn't needed. Not at her wedding. Not in her life, at least. Not in the way I imagined. It's strange, isn't it? How you can dedicate your entire life to someone and still be blindsided. I remember the exact day it hit me. I was sipping my morning coffee, reading the newspaper, when Lily came into the kitchen. She looked different. Not in appearance, she had grown, taller than I expected. Poised, confident, but in energy, in attitude. There was a subtle distance, a quiet assertion that was new, unfamiliar. And then she said it. "Dad, I don't think we need you involved in the wedding." I stared at her for a moment, coffee mug halfway to my lips, frozen. My mind tried to process the words. My stomach knotted. My heart, well, it felt like it skipped several beats. And in that instant, the world seemed smaller, colder. How could she say that? How could she, after everything, decide that I wasn't needed? I wanted to ask, to plead, to explain, but somehow no words came. Instead, I watched her walk away, confident, determined, smiling, a smile that did not include me, a smile that excluded me. And I realized then, in that quiet, painful moment, that the dream I had held on to for 20 years might never come true. That day haunted me for weeks. Nights when I tried to sleep, my mind replayed the scene over and over. I remembered every time I had stayed late to pay for her dance lessons, every college fund deposit, every little sacrifice I had made. And I began to question, did it even matter? Did my love matter? Or had it been taken for granted, assumed, never really appreciated? I won't lie. I felt anger. I felt hurt. I felt betrayal. And that anger planted a seed of curiosity, of strategy, of something I had never considered before. Could it be possible, I wondered, that if she didn't need me in the way I thought, then maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to give in the way I always had? You might think I'm cruel, that I'm overreacting, but I want you to understand something. When someone tells you they don't need you, when they imply that all your sacrifices, your love, your devotion mean nothing, it shakes something fundamental. And for the first time, I began to see our relationship through a new lens, a lens that wasn't just about unconditional love, but about respect, recognition, and yes, boundaries. As the weeks passed, Lily's engagement parties, planning meetings, and excited calls became more frequent. And with each one, I felt the same knot in my stomach. I was expected to offer advice, to smile, to be the supportive father. And yet, every time I opened my wallet, every time I offered assistance, every time I tried to show love, I was reminded that she didn't want me there, that she didn't need me. And in that realization, the seed that had been planted began to grow. There's a point where hurt transforms into action, a point where disappointment turns into something else. And I reached that point. I didn't know it yet. Not fully. But deep down, I sensed that the wedding, the day I had dreamed about my entire life, would not be what I imagined, and that knowledge, strange as it sounds, gave me power. Not the kind of power that breaks hearts, but the kind that redefines expectations, the kind that forces the world to acknowledge your value. I began to reflect on every moment of our lives together, every sacrifice I had made, every word of encouragement, every sleepless night, every tear shed for her happiness. And I realized something important. Love is infinite, but respect has limits. And when that limit is tested, sometimes you have to make choices that surprise even yourself. That was the beginning of a journey I had never intended to take. A journey that would test family bonds, challenge my patience, and ultimately redefine the meaning of fatherhood in a way I could never have imagined. But it all started with one sentence. Dad, I don't think we need you involved in the wedding. And as I sat there staring at my coffee cup, I knew the dream I had cherished for so long was slipping through my fingers. But perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't the only dream I could chase. This version is fully humanized, professional in tone, cinematic, and crafted for high retention with suspense, emotional beats, curiosity hooks, and reflection pauses. I can do the same treatment for Chapter 2 next, where the exclusion deepens and the tension rises to keep viewers glued for the next 10-12 minutes. Do you want me to proceed with Chapter 2? You said, now create a hook, intro, that's going to hook viewers for the first 30 seconds. ChatGPT said, absolutely. The first 30 seconds of a YouTube story like this has to grab attention, tease drama, and create curiosity. Here's a polished hook for your video. Soft, suspenseful music, slow zoom in on narrator's face or cinematic shot. I thought my daughter would want me there on the most important day of her life, her wedding, but instead she looked me in the eye and said, Dad, we don't need you involved. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I realized that if she didn't need me there, maybe she didn't need my money either. What happened next? It changed everything. And trust me, you won't believe how far I went. It started with excitement, like every father imagines when his child announces an engagement. I remember Lily bursting into the kitchen one morning, her face glowing, clutching that little velvet box as if it held the world inside. Dad, she said, barely able to contain herself, I'm engaged. Her fiancé, Mark, stood quietly behind her, a shy smile on his face. I smiled too. The kind of smile that swells with pride and relief. Finally, my little girl had found someone to love her, someone I could trust, to care for her the way I always had. I reached out instinctively, eager to hold that tiny hand I had once guided through scraped knees and birthday candles. But instead of grabbing my hand, she gently withdrew hers. We're doing this ourselves, Dad," she said softly, eyes avoiding mine. "We don't need a lot of help." At first I thought I must have misheard her. Surely she was just overwhelmed with excitement. Surely she meant she wanted to handle the small details, not everything. But over the next few days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time I offered a suggestion, venues, caterers, the guest list, she politely declined. "We've got it covered, Dad," she said, and every time I offered to help with the budget, she waved me off. "Thanks, but we can manage." I tried to brush it off at first. I told myself, she's grown now. She wants independence. It's a good thing. I should be proud. But pride quickly turned to confusion, and confusion to unease. I had always been there for her, every step of the way, and now she was drawing lines. Invisible lines, lines that excluded me. The first engagement party should have been a celebration. I had been looking forward to it for months, imagining the warmth, the laughter, the feeling of family together in a room filled with love. But instead, I arrived to find myself almost invisible. Friends and distant relatives mingled around me, exchanging pleasantries, while Lily and Mark huddled together, discussing plans I wasn't allowed to contribute to. I tried to join in, gently offering a suggestion for the florist, a comment about the venue, something to feel included. But she smiled politely and said, "We already have that covered, Dad." It was subtle, but the sting was undeniable. I could feel it in my chest, a hollow ache that seemed to grow with every interaction. I had raised this girl, nurtured her, given her everything I could, and yet she treated me as optional. Not optional in a gentle, playful way, but as if I were a piece of furniture in the background, nice to have around, but not essential. One evening, I tried talking to her directly. "Lily," I began, trying to keep my voice calm, steady, "I feel like you don't want me involved. Am I wrong?" She looked up at me, eyes steady but distant, and said, "We just want it to be our day, Dad. Nothing personal. We love you, of course, but this is about us." I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. On the outside, I looked like I understood. On the inside, something broke a little. How could she say it so casually, as if all my sacrifices, all my support, all the years of love I poured into her didn't matter? How could she frame this as love when it felt like rejection? And yet, even as I hurt, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was about her fiancé. Maybe he didn't want me involved. Maybe she was under pressure, trying to assert independence. But every dinner, every conversation, every call seemed to confirm the truth. They didn't want me in their wedding. Not in any meaningful way. The budget discussions were worse. Lily and Mark assumed I would cover certain expenses. The caterer, the flowers, the photographer, they assumed I would be responsible. And every time I hesitated, every time I questioned it, they acted shocked. "Oh, come on, Dad, you'll help, right? You wouldn't let us down." It was like they were trying to manipulate me into providing for something that wasn't meant for me. It hit me then. This wasn't just exclusion, it was entitlement. They didn't need me emotionally, they needed me financially. And the realization sent a shiver down my spine. I began reflecting on the past 25 years. I thought about every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every time I put her needs above my own. College tuition, dance recitals, weekend trips, even the small things, buying her that favorite ice cream when she had a bad day, taking her out to celebrate a good grade, helping her through heartbreaks I wished I could solve for her. And now, at the supposed pinnacle of all those sacrifices, she didn't need me, not in the way that mattered. I remember sitting alone in the study one night, staring at the bills and receipts, counting up what I'd given over the years, and wondering if all of it had been worth it. Not because I regretted loving her, never that, but because I realized something I hadn't considered before. If love was assumed, if presence was optional, if care could be dismissed, maybe the time had come to redefine the terms. I can still see her laughing at the engagement party, leaning on Mark's shoulder, radiant and confident. Friends complimented her dress, the way she had handled every detail, and she glowed. But I noticed something too, something small and human that no one else seemed to see. The slight strain in her smile when someone brought up family contributions. The brief glance toward me, almost guilt but quickly replaced with determination. It was as if she was proud of managing everything without me, and I realized that pride, as impressive as it seemed, came at a cost. The tension continued to build with each planning session. Invitations were sent, deposits made, and I was left out of the loop. "We've already booked the photographer, Dad," Lily said, gently but firmly. It was easier this way. And I thought, easier for whom? Certainly not for me. It was easier for her to control everything and maintain the distance she seemed intent on keeping. I began noticing other subtle signs. Details she didn't share, meetings she scheduled without me, decisions made quietly and communicated casually afterward. Each instance reinforced the same truth: I wasn't needed, and perhaps they were beginning to take for granted not only my presence, but my resources. And yet, I couldn't stop caring. I wanted to be involved, to give advice, to help, but every offer of support was politely deflected, every attempt to contribute subtly rebuffed. It was like being invisible in plain sight, like watching a play where you were supposed to be the main actor but had been reassigned to the audience. One night, after yet another polite refusal, I sat in the living room alone, staring at the soft glow of the lamp. I asked myself a question I never expected to ask. What happens when someone doesn't need you in the way you always thought? When the very person you've sacrificed everything for dismisses your role, treats you as optional, and assumes your contributions as guaranteed? How do you respond without losing yourself in hurt and anger? That question didn't have a clear answer, but I felt something stirring deep inside me, a sense that things couldn't continue as they had. That perhaps my involvement, my giving, my unquestioned presence was being taken for granted. And if she didn't need me in the way that mattered, maybe it was time to start considering what I did need. It wasn't immediate, not like a switch flipping. It began slowly, subtly, like the first stirrings of a storm you sense before the thunder. I started imagining the wedding differently, not as the perfect day I had dreamed about, but as a situation where my presence was optional, my resources assumed, my efforts invisible. And in that imagining, a strange clarity emerged. If they didn't need me, then maybe I didn't need to give everything I had unconditionally. I began testing the waters, suggesting small adjustments to plans, offering to handle certain payments, and watching how quickly my offers were either ignored or taken for granted. Each time, it confirmed the same truth. My role had shifted from cherished father to assumed benefactor, and with that realization, the quiet seed of resolve began to take root. By the end of that month, the engagement had progressed to the point where it was clear I was on the outside. I was welcome in name, but not in influence or decision-making. And as the frustration built, as the hurt coiled in my chest like a living thing, I began to think about the coming wedding in a way I never had before. Not as a celebration of love and family, but as a stage where my absence might just speak louder than my presence ever could. And for the first time, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't powerless. I hadn't lost my place entirely. There were choices I could make, decisions that would force recognition, command, respect, and remind everyone, most of all Lily, that love without acknowledgement can feel like emptiness. That was the moment I understood. The engagement, the planning, the excitement, it wasn't just about her day anymore. It was about testing boundaries, assessing respect, and ultimately deciding how far I would allow myself to be taken for granted. And while I still loved her, while I still wanted her happiness, I also realized I had a voice, and it was time to use it. The morning Lily told me she didn't need me at her wedding replayed in my mind like a broken record. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, a fleeting rebellion, an overreaction to the excitement and stress of planning. But the more time passed, the more impossible it became to ignore the truth. She had drawn a line, and I was on the wrong side of it. It wasn't just the words she spoke, it was the way she said them. Calm, casual, almost rehearsed. Like she had considered my feelings, weighed them carefully, and then decided they didn't matter. That was the part that hurt the most. The quiet deliberation behind her rejection, the sense that this was not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, but a deliberate choice. The first real confrontation happened over dinner. I tried to approach it carefully, as if testing the waters. "Lily," I began, forcing calm into my voice. "I feel like you're pushing me away from the wedding. Am I wrong?" She looked at me, her eyes steady but distant. "We just want it to be our day, Dad. Nothing personal. We love you, of course. But this is about us." I felt the words like a punch to the chest. "Nothing personal," she said, as if wiping away the years I had spent being personal, being present, being the person who carried her through life's difficulties. How could she so casually dismiss decades of devotion? Over the next few weeks, the exclusion became impossible to ignore. Invitations, planning sessions, vendor meetings, she navigated them all without me. Every suggestion I made was politely declined. Every offer to help was met with a dismissive, "We've got it covered, Dad." I watched from the sidelines as the wedding that was supposed to include me took shape without me. And the more I tried to participate, the more invisible I felt. It wasn't just about being left out, it was about being assumed. She assumed I would pay for things, assume I would handle responsibilities, assume I would quietly comply. And every time I hesitated, every time I questioned an expense or a decision, I was met with subtle, almost innocent shock. "Oh, Dad, you'll help, right? You wouldn't let us down?" I sat with that sentence for hours. You wouldn't let us down. That's all I was now. A safety net, a wallet, a provider. Not a father. Not someone whose presence mattered. Just someone who could be relied on to fund a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend meaningfully. I began replaying every memory, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every extra shift I had worked to give her the life she deserved. I remembered her first dance recital, her first heartbreak, her first college acceptance letter. And I realized none of that mattered to her in the way I thought it did. None of it counted for anything when she could exclude me from the most important day of her life. One night, I tried again, sitting her down with careful words. "Lily, I've always supported you, but it feels like I'm being pushed out. Your wedding is important, but so am I. Am I wrong to feel hurt?" She looked at me with a mixture of irritation and exasperation, like I had brought up a trivial concern. "Dad, you're not wrong to feel hurt, but we have this under control. We don't need interference. We love you, and we'll see you there, but please, just trust us." The subtle message was clear. You're welcome in name only. Your input is unwanted. Your presence is tolerated, not needed. It was during these moments that I started noticing things that had previously seemed insignificant. Details she didn't share, decisions made quietly, subtle adjustments that kept me from having any real influence. Every exclusion, every polite dismissal reinforced the same truth. I was being systematically pushed aside. And then there was Mark, her fiancé. I had liked him at first, had tried to embrace him as part of our family, but I noticed the way he sometimes nodded along when Lily subtly shut me down. The way he deferred entirely to her judgment, as if my existence in their planning was a minor annoyance. I couldn't blame him entirely. He was new to the family, but it added another layer to the growing distance between us. I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years, a simmering frustration, a quiet anger that pulsed just beneath the surface. Not anger at her fiancé, not even anger at Lily herself, but at the situation, at the unspoken expectation that I would simply accept exclusion, that I would quietly comply with financial demands while being pushed to the periphery. One evening, I found myself staring at the wedding plans she had emailed me, carefully ignoring my suggestions. I realized I was watching the culmination of decades of my life, the child I had raised, nurtured, and loved turning into a reality in which I had no meaningful role. And in that realization, a thought took hold. If she didn't need me in the way I imagined, maybe I didn't need to give everything I had been giving. I began testing my boundaries, subtly at first. I offered to help with certain payments, watching how my offers were brushed aside or taken for granted. I suggested small compromises, only to have them rejected. Each refusal confirmed the same truth. I was expected to provide, but not participate. And with every confirmation, the seed of resolve planted itself more firmly in my mind. I also started to observe her reactions in social situations. At the engagement party, she smiled brightly at friends, laughed at jokes, engaged fully with her new social circle. But I noticed a faint strain when the topic of family contributions came up. A subtle, almost imperceptible glance toward me, guilt quickly replaced by determination. It was as if she was proud of managing everything without me, and I realized the irony. Her independence, her pride, was built on the assumption of my silent support. By now, the engagement had reached a point where my role was clearly defined. Welcome in theory, irrelevant in practice. Invitations were sent, deposits paid, decisions finalized, all without my meaningful input. And I felt a mixture of sadness, anger, and incredulity. I had spent my life pouring into this relationship, and now I was being treated as optional. It was during one particularly tense evening, after yet another polite rejection of my suggestion, that I sat alone in the study, staring at the floor, and asked myself a question I had never considered before. What happens when someone doesn't need you in the way you've always believed? When every effort, every sacrifice, every ounce of love is acknowledged in theory but dismissed in practice? How do you respond when your value is assumed rather than recognized? That question lingered in the silence. It was uncomfortable, unsettling, but it was also revealing. I began to realize that while I couldn't force anyone to include me emotionally, I could control my response. I could choose what to give, how to give it, and whether I would continue to allow my presence to be taken for granted. And so, slowly, deliberately, I began to plan. Not a rash, angry plan, but a measured, considered one. I wasn't yet sure what it would look like, but the idea had taken root. If they didn't need me in the way I had believed, perhaps it was time for me to reconsider how I participated at all. Perhaps it was time for the people who assumed my love, my support, and my resources to understand that nothing should be taken for granted. That realization didn't make the hurt go away. It didn't erase the disappointment, the sadness, the sense of betrayal, but it gave me clarity. It gave me a direction, and for the first time, I felt a quiet, steady sense of power, the power to make choices that respected both my love and my boundaries. By the time the next round of wedding meetings rolled around, I was ready. I listened, I observed, and I made subtle decisions, small steps that would test whether my presence was truly appreciated or merely assumed. And with each interaction, each polite dismissal, each subtle disregard for my input, I grew more certain. The way forward was not through compliance, not through silent suffering, but through thoughtful, deliberate action. And so the stage was set. The exclusion was complete. The expectations were clear. And I, at last, understood something I hadn't realized before. Love without acknowledgement can feel like emptiness, and sometimes the only way to be truly seen is to redefine the terms entirely. By now, the wedding was no longer a celebration. For me, it had become a minefield of subtle exclusions, assumptions, and silent indignities. Each day brought another gentle reminder that my presence, my advice, and even my love were considered optional. Every email I received, every planning call I was left out of, felt like a small betrayal, each one building into a mountain of frustration and hurt I could no longer ignore. It was a quiet Thursday evening when I finally reached the breaking point. Lily had called earlier, casually mentioning that the caterer would handle the special requests I'd offered to pay for. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, an ache that had been growing for weeks, but this time, it wasn't just hurt. It was resolve. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop. I had a choice: continue to give, to be assumed, or take control of the situation. And in that moment, a thought struck me with crystal clarity. If she didn't need me, maybe she didn't need my money either. The first thing I did was make a few phone calls. I started with the caterer, using calm, professional tones, pretending it was routine business. "Hello," I said. "This is Mr. Parker, the account holder for the upcoming wedding. I need to review a few details regarding payment and confirmation." I could hear the confusion on the other end. "Sir, everything was confirmed by Miss Parker's fiancé. We assumed payment would be processed as agreed." "Yes," I said, leaning back in my chair, savoring the first thrill of power I'd felt in weeks. "We'll need to put a hold on that for now. Please do not proceed with any services until we speak further." As I hung up, a quiet sense of satisfaction mixed with adrenaline. It wasn't just about money, it was about acknowledgement, about forcing a pause, about making the world notice that my contributions were not to be taken for granted. But that was only the beginning. Over the next few hours, I called the florist, the photographer, and even the venue coordinator. Each call required careful diplomacy, a soft, almost courteous tone that masked the small rebellion I was orchestrating behind the scenes. By the end of the night, nearly every major aspect of the wedding was officially on hold, and the weight of it was intoxicating. I expected confrontation, of course, but the first person to react wasn't Lily, it was Mark. He showed up at my door the next morning, a mixture of panic and indignation plastered across his face. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "We've got deadlines, deposits, vendors. This is serious." I leaned against the doorframe, calm, almost serene. "I know," I said, "and that's exactly why I'm handling it. It seems there's been a misunderstanding about my role in this wedding. I'm happy to help, but only if my contributions are respected, and only if my presence is considered more than just optional." Mark's jaw tightened. "You can't just—" "I just did," I interrupted, the first spark of the power I had felt last night surging through me. "If Lily doesn't need me, then I don't need to comply blindly. This is my choice." For a moment, he looked like he was about to argue, and then the first plot twist hit. Lily herself appeared in the doorway, her expression not angry, not pleading, but uncertain. I had never seen her like that before. It was as if my actions had shaken her certainty, fractured the carefully constructed illusion that I was irrelevant. "Dad, what have you done?" she asked quietly, almost as if she was testing the boundaries herself. I smiled faintly. "I've ensured that my contributions and my presence are not assumed, Lily. I've been your silent supporter for 25 years. That support deserves acknowledgement." Her face paled slightly. You put everything on hold?" "Yes," I said. "Everything." There was a long silence. The kind of silence that stretches, heavy with realization and fear. And then, the second plot twist. One of the vendors called her phone in the middle of the night, insisting that deposits weren't received. Panic set in. Suddenly, the carefully constructed world she and Mark had built, assuming my automatic support, began to crumble. I watched from the shadows of their frantic reactions, a strange mixture of sorrow and satisfaction washing over me. I wasn't doing this to hurt her well, maybe a little, but more than anything, I was asserting my value, reminding them that love, support, and decades of devotion were not interchangeable with money or assumed obedience. Over the next few days, tensions escalated. Lily attempted to placate me with calls, soft words, reassurances that they hadn't meant to exclude me. But the underlying truth remained. She had assumed I would give, and I had withdrawn that assumption. And in doing so, I had taken control. Here's where the third plot twist hits. I began receiving unexpected support from family members who had quietly noticed how she had treated me. My siblings, who had watched quietly as I tried to be both present and supportive, now began quietly advising Lily and Mark to reconsider their approach. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. I wasn't the antagonist in my own story. I was the catalyst for accountability. By the end of the week, something remarkable happened. Lily came to me, tears in her eyes, a mixture of guilt and recognition. "Dad, I didn't realize. I thought I was being independent, but I see now I was dismissive. I should have considered your feelings." I could feel the full weight of 25 years of love and exclusion in that moment. But I remained calm, composed. I didn't gloat. I didn't relish in vindication. Instead, I said quietly, "It's not too late to do this the right way, but respect, acknowledgement, those are not optional." And just as I thought the storm had settled, the fourth plot twist appeared. Mark, frustrated and cornered by both Lily and me, revealed he had been considering changing the wedding entirely without consulting anyone, as a power move to assert control. Suddenly, the wedding was no longer a simple celebration. It had become a battlefield of egos, expectations, and long-hidden resentments. I realized then that this wasn't just about money or attendance or recognition. It was about the fragile dynamics of family, pride, and love. And I also realized something else. I could navigate this storm carefully, ensuring my values were respected, while still protecting the love I felt for my daughter. That week, as I sat alone one night reflecting, I understood the truth of all of it. Boundaries are powerful. Actions speak louder than words, and sometimes the only way to be truly seen is to disrupt the assumptions of those around you. By the time the weekend arrived, the wedding preparations were tense, uncertain, and unpredictable. But I felt alive. I had reclaimed a piece of myself I hadn't realized I had lost in the years of unquestioned giving. And I knew one thing with certainty. The next move in this story wouldn't be mine alone. It would test everyone involved, forcing them to confront truths they had long ignored. And deep down, I couldn't help but smile. The morning of the wedding arrived like any other, bright, deceptively peaceful, carrying the weight of expectation and excitement. I woke early, brewed my coffee, and sat by the window, watching the world continue as usual. Birds chirped, cars passed, neighbors waved. The ordinary rhythm of life went on, while inside me a storm had been quietly brewing for weeks. Today would be different. Today would be the culmination of all the exclusion, all the assumptions, all the disregard for my presence, and I would finally see it unfold in a way that no one would forget. I arrived at the venue just as the first guests began to trickle in. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers, cut grass, and the faint tang of nervous anticipation. Lily looked radiant, the kind of beauty that makes a room pause for a second. And yet, I noticed it immediately. Her confidence carried a fragile edge. There was something in the set of her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked toward the coordinators, a subtle tension that wasn't there in the early planning stages. The first ripple of the consequences of my actions was already appearing. The ceremony hall was set up perfectly, or so it seemed. White chairs in precise rows, flowers arranged meticulously, a soft breeze through the open windows. Guests chatted, unaware of the quiet chaos I had orchestrated behind the scenes. And then I noticed the first real sign of panic. The caterers were there, but they were disorganized, fumbling with last-minute adjustments because I had halted payment until the previous week. The florist's table, once perfectly arranged, now had a few missing arrangements. The photographer too was adjusting schedules, unsure which shots would be covered. I could feel the tension building, not just in the staff, but in the air around me. Lily was noticing it too. Her carefully constructed bubble of control was starting to show cracks. I stayed calm, sipping my coffee, watching it all unfold, my mind replaying every moment from the past weeks, the subtle exclusions, the dismissals, the assumptions that had brought us to this point. Mark was pacing near the altar, muttering under his breath, clearly frustrated. "We can't have this," he said quietly, to no one in particular. "Everything's falling apart. I didn't intervene. I wanted them to experience the consequences of their assumptions, the reality of relying on someone's compliance without acknowledgement." Then came the first confrontation. Lily, attempting to restore control, approached me hesitantly. "Dad, I didn't expect this to happen," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I thought you were just, testing us." I smiled softly, calm, almost fatherly, as I met her gaze. "I've been testing more than you realize, Lily. I've been testing respect, acknowledgement, and boundaries." Her eyes widened slightly. "Boundaries?" she echoed, as if trying to grasp the concept. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "If someone doesn't need me in their plans, I don't need to give blindly. That's all." For a moment, she looked hurt, but not from what I was doing. The hurt came from realizing that her carefully constructed wedding had been built on assumptions that were no longer guaranteed. The control she thought she had was slipping, and for the first time she had to confront reality. My love and support are not tools to be assumed. They are earned, respected, and acknowledged. The ceremony began, but it was different. Not ruined, not exactly, but tense, uneven. Guests whispered, noticing the subtle disruptions, the slight gaps in service, the improvisations staff had to make on the fly. Lily walked down the aisle with grace, but her smile was tinged with unease. Every step she took reminded me of the weeks leading up to this moment, the careful planning she had thought immune to disruption. Then came the second twist, the one that truly made my pulse race. Midway through the ceremony, a loud knock echoed through the hall. The officiant paused, glancing nervously at the doors. The caterer entered, looking flustered. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice strained. "We're missing part of the payment. We cannot proceed with the meal as planned until this is resolved." The room went quiet. A few guests exchanged glances, confused. Lily froze, panic spreading across her face. Mark's jaw tightened, his hands shaking slightly. And in that moment, I realized something important. Consequences are far more effective than words. Actions, deliberate and measured, speak louder than any lecture or plea. I stepped forward calmly. "Everything has been handled," I said, my voice carrying authority. "But it needed to be addressed. I'm happy to discuss resolutions once respect and acknowledgement are in place." The tension was palpable. Lily's eyes welled with tears, not anger, not fear, but realization. She had built this entire event on the assumption that I would comply without question. That assumption had been shattered. And in that quiet, heavy pause, I felt a strange sense of relief. The ceremony resumed, but the energy had shifted. Guests were more aware, more attentive, sensing something beneath the surface. I stayed in my place, observing, not interfering further. I had delivered my statement through action, through the subtle chaos I had orchestrated. And now I watched the emotional fallout play out naturally. After the ceremony, as guests began to mingle, Lily approached me again. This time her tone was softer, more vulnerable. "Dad, I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I didn't realize. I thought I was just being independent. I see now I assumed too much. I didn't think about how it would make you feel." I looked at her for a long moment, my heart aching but my mind clear. "It's not about money, Lily. It's not about control. It's about acknowledgement, respect, knowing that love and support are not endless resources to be taken for granted." Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time that day, I felt the tension ease slightly. Mark approached, attempting to apologize for his own role, realizing that his unilateral actions had contributed to the chaos. Together, we began to navigate the remainder of the day carefully, restoring order while preserving the lesson I had delivered. The final twist, perhaps the most satisfying, came as the reception began. Guests noticed subtle improvements, adjustments made quickly, staff improvising under pressure. And in the middle of it all, Lily took my hand, holding it tightly for a brief moment. "Dad, I needed you more than I realized," she whispered. In that instant, I understood something vital. The story wasn't about revenge or humiliation or control. It was about teaching, asserting, and reclaiming value that had been overlooked. The lesson was delivered not cruelly, but firmly. The chaos of the day had become the mechanism by which acknowledgement was forced and boundaries were respected. As the night settled, I found a quiet corner, sipping a drink, observing the room. Lily danced, laughing with Mark and their friends, the tension easing into a genuine celebration. And though the path to this moment had been rocky, filled with deliberate disruptions and carefully measured consequences, I felt a sense of peace. I had stood up for myself. I had ensured that my presence and my respect could not be ignored. And in doing so, I had reshaped not just the wedding day, but the dynamic of our relationship. By the time the night ended, the guests departed and the lights dimmed. I realized something profound. Love is infinite, but respect must be earned. The day had been a test, a crucible, and though it had been uncomfortable, chaotic, and tense, it had delivered clarity. Lily had learned, I had reclaimed my boundaries, and the story that began with exclusion ended with recognition, powerful, necessary, and unforgettable. And as I stepped outside into the cool night air, I smiled quietly. The wedding had happened. The lessons had been delivered, and for the first time in weeks,